I have replaced 2 commercial water heaters, a structural slate roof, 3 diesel truck engines, and an entire solid oak kitchen floor in my lifetime. I fully understood how mechanical systems wear down under continuous pressure. I just never expected my own right hip to be next on the maintenance log. The orthopedic surgeon, a clinical young man named Dr. Leonard, who looked to be in his early 40s, and spoke with the detached, absolute confidence of someone who had executed this exact procedure 800 times, told me that a total hip replacement at age 78 was, in his professional estimation, very routine. But then he glanced down at my intake file, adjusted his glasses, and dropped a very specific piece of data. He casually noted that a 78-year-old patient living completely alone in a massive, historic 3-story estate faces a 40% higher post-operative complication risk without immediate, dedicated family assistance at home during the initial weeks. Dr. Leonard delivered that statistic with the clinical indifference people use when it isn't their marrow being drilled into on the operating table. I didn't flinch, and I didn't complain. I simply nodded politely, reached into my breast pocket, and noted that 40% metric down in my heavy leather field book. I didn't write it out of fear. I recorded it as a precise structural benchmark, a baseline stress test that my 3 adult children were about to be measured against. I gave all 3 of them exactly 6 weeks' notice before the scheduled surgery date. 6 weeks. I want you to hold that number in your mind. That is 42 days. 42 full rotations of the Earth, during which any single one of them could have circled a date on a kitchen calendar, requested a single PTO day from work, arranged a local babysitter, or simply driven 30 minutes up Interstate 65 to our historic family estate on Timbercrest Way in Zionsville, Indiana, to sit with their 78-year-old father before he went under general anesthesia. Let me tell you exactly what my oldest son, Pierce, did with his 42 days. Pierce is 49, a corporate vice president who treats his own family like an aggressive corporate merger. He called me on a Tuesday evening, and I could instantly hear the distinct echoing roar of a sports broadcast in the background, accompanied by the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of his fingers on a screen that told me he was scrolling through his work emails while speaking to his father. "Don't sweat it, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with that smooth, executive efficiency. "We'll all be there, the whole clan." But then, without missing a single beat, he seamlessly pivoted to the real reason for his call. He explicitly revealed that he had set up automated Zillow asset alerts for my Timbercrest Way property, casually noting that a recent historic market surge in Zionsville meant that liquidating the estate right now would easily maximize the family inheritance portfolio through a tax-sheltered trust. He was already dividing up the concrete foundations before the surgeon had even made the first incision. Welcome to Dad's Ultimate Payback. Get comfortable, because this story is going to take you to a very quiet, cold, and calculated place. Do me a quick favor right now. Smash that like button, drop a comment letting me know what city you're listening from, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Trust me, you are going to want an absolute front row seat when the final engineering report on this family drops. Then came my middle child, Courtney. Courtney didn't call. She sent a multimedia voice memo lasting exactly 4 minutes and 22 seconds. I know the precise duration because I listened to the audio file 3 times in the quiet of my study, not because the words were moving, but because I was calculating the exact ratio of performative sincerity to actual substance. The memo was a breathless, high-velocity whirlwind of modern suburban crisis tropes. She was deeply, profoundly sorry about the terrible timing, but her schedule was an absolute minefield. There was a massive Peloton delivery delay she had to personally supervise, an elite travel soccer tournament across state lines in Ohio, and a sudden Whole Foods catering mishap for a country club school fundraiser that demanded her complete, undivided attention. It was a flawless checklist of performative filial piety, except Courtney made one fatal mechanical error. She forgot to hit the stop button on her phone, and the recording kept running for an extra 10 seconds after she finished her speech. The microphone perfectly captured the sound of her car door shutting, followed by a loud, mocking laugh shared with her husband David. "Thank God Pierce is stepping up to handle the old man's medical drama," she laughed, her voice crystal clear on the tape. "Now we don't have to completely ruin our weekend plans at the lake." I listened to the audio clip one last time, saved the digital file onto a secure server, and turned off my phone. The stress load on the family structure had officially crossed the breaking point. 3 weeks before my scheduled surgery, my youngest daughter, Cassidy, called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen slicing turkey for a sandwich, and I felt that familiar reflexive warmth hit my chest the moment her name lit up the glass screen. It's the kind of warmth you keep holding onto for something you love, even after it has left you empty more times than you care to count. I answered on the second ring. She started the conversation with a shaky, hurried inquiry about how I was feeling, but within 90 seconds, the performative concern dissolved into a practiced, trembling sob. She claimed she was in a desperate situation. Her freelance work had dried up, and she was exactly $1,500 short on her rent, facing immediate eviction. Because I am her father, and because 40 years of habit had conditioned me to say yes, I opened the banking app on my phone and transferred the funds before she could even finish her sentence. "Thanks, Dad. Real lifesaver. Feel better," she murmured, hanging up instantly. But the true, devastating metric of her deceit arrived when I checked my digital statement later that evening. The $1,500 I had sent under the guise of basic survival had been processed within 2 hours at a high-end luxury resort boutique in Miami Beach, where Cassidy was actively vacationing with her friends, sipping cocktails, and completely ghosting my pre-op medical preparations. On the morning of October 4th, I woke up at 5:15 a.m. into a house that possessed a heavy, hollow silence. I made a pot of black coffee I wasn't legally allowed to drink, sat in my study, and watched the cold Indiana sun paint the changing leaves on Timbercrest Way. At 6:30 a.m., I ordered a standard rideshare, checked myself into IU Health Methodist Hospital, and prepared to face the reality of general anesthesia entirely alone. The subsequent 13 days were a grueling masterclass in physical indignity and absolute isolation. A total hip replacement at 78 leaves you trapped in a twilight world of fluorescent lights, the relentless clinical beep of telemetry monitors, and the searing, uninvited midnight pain that introduces itself like an unwelcome tenant. But the centerpiece of my recovery wasn't the walker or the medication. It was the blue vinyl chair sitting on a crooked left leg in the corner of room 114. It sat there, tilted slightly to one side, completely empty day after day. The absolute depth of my children's negligence crystallized on day 9. A charge nurse stepped into my room to update my digital chart and quietly revealed that the hospital's automated post-op system had been flag-marking our file. The primary emergency contact numbers I had meticulously provided, belonging to Pierce and Courtney, had actively and repeatedly routed the hospital's critical medical updates straight into their phone's spam folders, deliberately ensuring their high-end weekend routines wouldn't be inconvenienced by their father's recovery. By day 11, the blue vinyl chair had become a monument to my own miscalculations. That afternoon, Nurse Gloria, a seasoned medical professional in her mid-50s with the efficient, tired warmth of someone who has witnessed every dark corner of human nature, came in to check my vitals. She wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm, her eyes lingering heavily on the completely undisturbed vinyl chair in the corner. She looked back at me, her expression softening into something raw and heavy. "Do you have family, Mr. Pendleton?" she asked gently. I looked at her, forced a calm engineering poker face, and lied. "Yes," I smiled. Gloria nodded slowly, the quiet, heavy nod people give when they fully comprehend the tragedy of what you aren't saying out loud. She finished her measurements in a comfortable, respectful silence. But before she left the room, she did something that altered the entire trajectory of my remaining years. She reached into her medical cart, quietly printed out a complimentary hospital resource booklet titled Senior Legal Rights and Independent Living Support, and set it firmly on my bedside tray table. She didn't say a single word as she placed it down. She didn't need to. Her eyes communicated the absolute clinical reality. Your bloodline has abandoned you, Art. The structure has failed. Protect yourself. On October 17th, Dr. Leonard signed my discharge papers, pronounced my mechanical recovery excellent, and shook my hand with his usual unshakable calm. A hospital volunteer wheeled me to the curb in a mandatory wheelchair, a policy I found both touching and absurd for a man who had spent 40 years supervising heavy industrial construction. I ordered an Uber from my phone, rode the 20 minutes back to Zionsville in a comfortable self-imposed silence, and stepped out onto the gravel driveway of my estate on Timbercrest Way. I stood on the front porch for a long moment, leaning heavily on my gray aluminum walker, staring at the front door I had hung myself back in 1989. The house was exactly as I had left it 13 days ago. When you live completely alone and return after nearly 2 weeks to find every object, every plant, and every speck of dust precisely where you left it, it means no one came. No one checked the locks. No one watered the dying fern on the windowsill, and no one walked the halls just to keep the space warm. But the true, sharp sting of reality was waiting for me in the heavy metal mailbox by the post. Stuffed between utility bills was a glossy, high-end invitation printed on heavy cardstock. It was an invite to a lavish, catered backyard pavilion unveiling party hosted jointly by Pierce and Courtney at their home, a celebration explicitly scheduled right in the dead center of my second week in the hospital. They were clinking champagne glasses and celebrating luxury property expansions while their father was learning how to navigate a walker in an empty hospital ward. I unlocked the door, walked inside the freezing house, and set my small paper bag of medications on the counter. I filled the kettle, set it on the gas stove, and walked slowly into my private study to call Harrison Vance, my estate attorney of 26 years. When Harrison answered, he skipped his usual warm greeting, his voice carrying the guarded, heavy tone of a man who had legal secrets he hated holding. I told him I was back, sitting in my chair, and that it was time to do some serious engineering on my assets. Harrison paused, a long clinical silence stretching across the line, before he dropped a devastating piece of data. He revealed that Pierce had secretly called his office the previous Monday morning, subtly, but aggressively asking if Harrison could release a copy of my current post-operative cognitive and medical evaluation. Pierce was already laying the groundwork to determine if the siblings had enough leverage to file for a court-ordered financial conservatorship over my estate, aiming to legally strip a lucid 78-year-old man of his autonomy under the guise of medical frailty. I took a slow sip of my tea, looking out at the fading Indiana sunset. "Draft the total revision to the will immediately, Harrison," I said, my voice entirely flat, cold, and measured. "The structural load has failed. It's time to clear the foundation." 6 weeks after my discharge, the paperwork was locked safely in Harrison's vault, and I decided it was time to host the annual family dinner. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen, carefully baking my late wife's signature buttermilk biscuits from scratch, letting the warm, familiar scent of cast-iron pot roast fill the entire house. When Pierce, Courtney, and Cassidy arrived, the atmosphere was suffocatingly performative. They burst through the door with an overwhelming rehearsed display of affection, hugging me a beat too long, asking about my hip with a high-pitched sincerity that lacked any real weight. It was a masterclass in an audition dinner, a group of adults desperately performing the roles of devoted children for a father they thought was holding the keys to their future. But Pierce couldn't keep the corporate mask on for long. Less than 20 minutes into the evening, he quietly slipped away from the living room, claiming he just wanted to check the furnace air filters in the back hallway to ensure his old dad was breathing clean air. I quietly maneuvered my walker down the carpeted corridor and caught him red-handed. The door to my private study was pushed open, and Pierce was standing over my desk, his smartphone out, actively photographing the faded labels on the locked, fireproof steel filing cabinets where my property deeds and corporate portfolios were stored. I stood in the doorway, watched his reflection in the window glass, and smiled. He thought he was cataloging his upcoming inheritance. He had no idea he was just photographing an empty vault. Following that autumn family dinner where I casually dropped the phrase, "getting my affairs in order," the structural behavioral shift in my children was instantaneous, predictable, and mathematically precise. The cold engineering machinery of their greed kicked into absolute high gear. My oldest son, Pierce, began calling me every single Sunday at exactly 10 a.m. Not 10:05, not 9:58, 10 a.m. sharp, with the mechanical reliability of a digital invoice. But the true, stomach-turning validation of his performative devotion arrived 2 weeks into the winter. A loud chime echoed from my iPad, a synced, automated family iCloud calendar notification I was never supposed to receive. Pierce had created a shared digital workspace for the 3 siblings, clinically titled Estate Maintenance. I opened the shared link and stared at the screen. The schedule didn't contain notes about my health or recovery milestones. It was populated with bulleted, corporate action items tracking my remaining days. The entry for my middle daughter read with devastating corporate precision: Thursdays Courtney drops groceries. Keep Art happy. Verify historic house structural condition. They weren't checking on their father. They were running a property audit on a schedule. Every single Thursday morning, right on cue, Courtney would pull into the driveway of the Zionsville estate. She would stride through the front door, her arms overflowing with high-end, organic groceries from the upscale markets downtown, acting incredibly warm, pleasant, and devoted. I would sit across from her at the kitchen island, drinking my coffee, swallowing a profound, suffocating sense of grief. I wasn't grieving the relationship we had now. I was grieving the beautiful, natural relationship that could have existed all along if they had just shown up when the blue vinyl chair in room 114 was empty. But the transactional nature of her care became blindingly clear when she left the receipts sitting on the counter. I picked up the printed paper and noticed the payment details. Courtney was using a corporate rewards card registered directly under her husband David's commercial business account to purchase my weekly food supply. She was literally writing off the performative care of her aging father as a tax-deductible business expense for their firm. Every loaf of bread and every carton of milk was being itemized to offset their quarterly corporate liabilities. Even Cassidy, my free-spirited youngest daughter, decided it was time to invest the absolute bare minimum of effort required to protect her stake in the inheritance. She began sending brief, grammatically approximate text messages to my phone. "Hey Dad, freezing out there, stay warm," followed a week later by a single, unexplained photograph of a brilliant orange sunset over a city skyline with absolutely no accompanying text whatsoever, her modern version of cheap family poetry. Because I am 78 years old and was raised with actual standards, I responded to every single message with full sentences, perfect syntax, and proper punctuation, except Cassidy forgot that 40 years as a structural engineer means I noticed the technical data behind every digital file. I downloaded the sunset photograph and examined the embedded metadata. The high-resolution image contained a live GPS geotag that placed Cassidy dead center at a luxury, invitation-only real estate investment seminar in downtown Chicago. She wasn't pausing her day to share a beautiful moment with her father. She was actively sitting in a lecture hall taking notes on how to forcefully liquidate and flip historic suburban estates, specifically targeting multi-acre craftsman properties identical to my Zionsville home. They were already spending the equity of a ghost, entirely unaware that the ghost had already filed the paperwork to permanently lock the door. In early April, as the fierce Indiana winter finally began to recede, Cassidy did something completely unprecedented. Out of the blue, she called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice carrying a soft, hesitant timbre I hadn't heard in years. She claimed she had been doing some deep soul-searching and felt a sudden, profound regret that she didn't truly know me as a person, rather than just as a father. She asked if she could take me out for a private lunch, just the two of us. But the illusion of her sudden enlightenment shattered the moment she sent the address. Instead of choosing one of the quiet, historic bistros in downtown Zionsville, where we could actually hear each other speak, Cassidy picked an incredibly cheap, chaotic, neon-lit interstate diner right off the exit of I-65. It was a high-volume truck stop baseline designed for maximum transit efficiency. She had selected a noisy, crowded environment specifically to minimize the amount of time she would have to spend looking me in the eye, turning what should have been a deep family reconciliation into a rapid, low-effort checklist item she could aggressively clear before her real weekend plans out of town began. We sat across from each other in a cracked vinyl booth, the air heavy with the smell of cheap grease and the deafening clatter of heavy ceramic mugs. As she picked at a stack of artificial blueberry pancakes, I quietly filled the conversational vacuum by talking about my early career days, specifically the rigorous structural stress testing protocols I used to run for major commercial bridge foundations back in the late 1980s. Cassidy listened intently, her eyes wide, until she suddenly dropped her fork, buried her face in a coarse paper napkin, and let out a dramatic, tearful confession. "I'm so sorry I didn't show up at the hospital, Dad," she sobbed, her shoulders shaking violently under the harsh fluorescent lights. "I've been trying to figure out how to say that to you for months. It haunts me." I looked across the table at my youngest child, my analytical mind instantly running the calculations behind her tears. Her emotional breakdown was raw, and her terror was genuine, but it wasn't born from authentic remorse. My attorney, Harrison Vance, had quietly logged that Pierce had desperately called Cassidy the night before, frantically warning her that I was actively rewriting my entire estate structure. Her tears were triggered entirely by the sudden, terrifying realization of financial exclusion. She wasn't weeping for her isolated father. She was mourning the imminent death of her trust fund. I reached across the table, tapped her hand once, and said a quiet, gentle, "I know." I refused to offer a single shred of false comfort or give her the absolution she was trying to extract for free. After paying the bill myself, I drove back to the Timbercrest Way estate and walked out into the backyard garden to watch the white dogwood trees bloom precisely on schedule. The afternoon breeze was crisp, and I felt an absolute, unshakable sense of peace settle deep into my chest. I was fully aware that the ironclad, irreversible estate amendments had already been filed, stamped, and locked securely behind the heavy steel doors of Harrison Vance's corporate vault. Later that evening, sitting in the absolute quiet of my study, I opened the digital encrypted backup to review the final execution documents one last time. The internal architecture of the new will was magnificent. Pierce, Courtney, and Cassidy had not been partially penalized. They had been entirely, permanently, and systematically removed from the lineage asset allocation. Every square inch of the historic Zionsville estate, every stock portfolio, every liquid capital reserve, and every single cent of my hard-earned wealth would be completely liquidated upon my passing. The entire multi-million-dollar asset structure was now legally designated to be distributed across 3 completely separate, independent corporate charities. The children had walked away from my empty hospital bed in room 114 to protect their schedules. Now, the paperwork was simply reflecting the exact same emptiness they had chosen. The internal architecture of my final legacy was not built out of spite. It was designed as a monument to structural integrity. Harrison Vance executed the allocation flawlessly, routing every cent of my life's work away from performative bloodlines and into 3 highly strategic endowments. The first went to a premier veteran assistance organization out of Louisville, providing unyielding support for the men and women who held the line when no one came for them either. The second was the Riley Hospital for Children, ensuring that innocent souls who never chose their hardships would receive the highest caliber of medical grace. But the crown jewel of the restructuring was the Art Pendleton Endowment for Aerospace Engineering at my alma mater, Purdue University. I added a 10% structural reinforcement clause to this specific fund that Harrison drafted with absolute clinical ice. The endowment dictates that no direct descendant, current relative, or future bloodline carrier of the Pendleton name can ever qualify for, manage, audit, or benefit from a single cent of the scholarship. The wealth generated by my 40-year engineering career is now permanently, irrevocably divorced from my children's genes. They wanted an effortless inheritance. Instead, they are legally barred from the very history they chose to exploit. The full weight of their calculation will only hit them when I am gone, waiting inside Harrison Vance's biometric safe in the form of a single-page blueprint. It is a letter written entirely by my own hand in rigid, blue drafting print. The small, clean lettering of a man who spent 4 decades making sure his measurements were unreadable to amateurs, but perfectly clear to professionals. The document contains no emotional grandstanding. Instead, the top half of the page features a meticulously drawn mathematical table. On the left axis, I mapped out the exact 312 hours of total physical isolation I endured in room 114 at IU Health Methodist Hospital, charted against the 42 days of advance warning I provided. On the right axis, I calculated the hundreds of thousands of dollars in tuition, bailouts, down payments, and luxury safety nets I willingly poured into their lives over 30 years. The math doesn't lie. The return on investment was 0. The final line of the print reads exactly as follows. In structural engineering, a foundation built with faulty, unrated support must be entirely demolished to preserve the surrounding ecosystem. I love you. That part never changed. But the paperwork doesn't know about the yellow jacket. It is a beautiful Saturday morning in early April, and I am sitting on the front porch of the Timbercrest Way estate, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. The dogwoods are in full, blinding bloom, and a brilliant wild cardinal has just landed on the cedar railing, regarding me with the regal, unburdened indifference of a creature that owes no one a transaction. I raise my cup to him in the morning light, fully aware that my children are currently performing tasks for a ghost. Right on cue, at exactly 10 a.m., my phone vibrates. It is Pierce, calling with that rhythmic corporate sun efficiency to check the market value of the Zionsville property. I answer warmly, listening to his rehearsed inquiries about my hip, matching his energy with the serene calm of a man who knows the load is perfectly secure. He has no idea that the day they left the blue vinyl chair empty was the exact day they signed their own financial eviction notice. The architecture is flawless. The structural integrity is restored, and I have never felt more at peace. If you respected this uncompromising blueprint of family justice and clinical engineering, do me one quick favor. Smash that like button right now. Drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from, and make sure you're subscribed to Dad's Ultimate Payback. We have plenty more cold, calculated, and deeply satisfying stories waiting in the archives. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next measurement.